Mike, thank you, Sarah, for sponsoring. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's great to be standing up talking. We've done a few shares events now. They've always been very well attended, and we've always had great interaction with people. So it's great to get a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Instem. Thank you, Mike. So I'm going to go through a bit of an intro to Instem, an explanation of the investment case. There's lots of things out there, obviously, that you can invest your hard-earned dollar in. We'd like to think there's a compelling reason why you should consider Instem. As you'll discover, we're an IT supplier to the pharmaceutical industry. We'll talk a little bit about the market environment, our product solutions, and so on. So we're very fortunate walking into work every day. It's very easy to be motivated as a IT supplier to the life sciences industry, somebody that leads, dominates several niche markets in this area globally. What we do every day is we help our clients bring life-enhancing products to market faster. A lot of those clients are pharmaceutical clients or the contract research organizations that service them, but also agrochemical companies, medical device companies. So a very worthy set of activities that we all participate in. Our focus, as we'll see on a later slide, in the research and development stages of life sciences, is all around collecting, analysing and reporting complex scientific data. A lot of the data is going to end up in a regulatory submission for the approval of a new drug to either go into humans for the first time or ultimately to be marketed. Clearly very important that that drug is collected with integrity, but also with efficiency. The drug development timeline is very long. Anything we can do to shorten that is very, very valuable, not just to our clients, but the patients at the end of the day. We've been in this industry for over 30 years. We've built up a prestigious client base. It includes 19 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies. We have operations around the world. Everywhere our clients do life sciences research and development, it's important that we're in that region supporting the sophisticated technology that we provide. As a software provider, having provided enterprise-scale software solutions for many years, and historically the way people acquired software was to buy perpetual licenses and then pay annual support and maintenance, we've built up a large value of recurring revenues that reliably renew year on year. So moving into each new year, we tend to have between 60 and 65% of our upcoming revenue is guaranteed from support and maintenance, and increasingly customers are subscribing to the software using software as a service. So if you're familiar with software technology businesses, that's the new model, and that adds to the recurring revenue. Right now, Instem finds itself in a fairly exciting place. Drug discovery, the earlier stages of that process are being heavily invested in by our clients. There's been a lot of capital inflow into the biotech industry. They're well funded for the next few years to progress their promising drug candidates. That's an area of the market that we focus, so that growing demand is feeding through into our technology. There's some new regulatory drivers coming along that's going to need technology to support what the regulators want to see. I'll talk about one of those, a regulation called SEND, a little later on. We operate in an industry that's very fragmented. Over the years, the pharmaceutical companies didn't exhibit very strong governance over what they allowed their very talented scientists to buy, the tools that they would use. And if If Dr. Jones said, I really must have this tool, it's the best thing out there, I can't do my work without it, he was allowed to go out and buy it. And that meant that many technology companies sprung up and were supported by the industry. Too many technology platforms are in use, and that's left the pharmaceutical companies with this huge issue of trying to manage many solutions. And so they're going through a process that other industries have done before them to try and massively reduce the numbers of suppliers down and to consolidate into a small number of strategic suppliers. And Instem's fortunate to be one of those strategic suppliers. As a consequence, there isn't just an organic growth opportunity for us, but there's an opportunity to consolidate some of the best of these smaller organizations and to integrate their technologies into our portfolio. So over the last 5 years since we IPO'd on AIM in 2010, we've completed 3 acquisitions. We'd completed acquisitions before that, but they are now well integrated and contributing well to our performance. At the macro level, some of the things that are actually feeding that success and that investment by our clients is clearly global population growth. We need to feed and to look after the healthcare of a growing population. In many countries now, there's a increasing wealth that allows them to afford the cost of drugs. And so the demand, not just in Europe and North America and Japan, that has generated most of the revenue for the pharmaceutical industry for many years, and there's aging populations that are keeping that going, a huge growth in demand for those products all around the world. The pharma industry, having had a few years where drugs were coming off patent, their revenues were challenged, they've been very successful over the last 2 or 3 years, bringing record levels of new drugs to market. That's generating the wealth for them to reinvest in future products. Now, there's a lot of data on here. There will be presentations available for you to take away at the end, so if you want to come back to any of this. The important thing on this slide, it's talking about the fact that the total number of drugs in the world's R&D pipeline is increasing. During a period when there was a challenging economic crisis globally, plus a challenging period for the pharma industry in terms of their success, the number of drugs in the pipeline leveled off. Over the last few years, it's growing strongly again. I mentioned that the biotech industry is very well funded at the moment. There's been huge capital inflows, so the numbers of companies that share the total just over 12,000 drugs that are in the pipeline, that's 3,300 companies. You can see that in the last 10 years, that's about doubled. There were 1,600 companies that had drugs in the R&D pipeline 10 years ago. Today, there's 3,300. That's clearly great for us because that's twice as many companies to sell our technology to. And probably for us, the most important chart on here is the numbers of drugs at the different stages of the R&D process. So preclinically, before you go into human trials for the first time, this is an area that when pharma was challenged with patent expiration, they were focusing on the drugs that were in the latest stages of their pipeline, things that were in phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials, so they could bring those drugs to market to replace the revenue that they were losing with drugs coming off patent. And whilst they were focusing in the late stages of clinical trials, which are very expensive, they actually turned down their expenditure in the earlier phases, which is where Instem focuses. Having been successful, there's then a huge switch back to focus on the earlier stages of the pipeline to fill that with promising compounds that they can then advance through clinical trials. So just to give a bit of a flavour, a feel for where our solutions sit, they're in these blue boxes, the 3 blue boxes. You see a typical R&D timeline, so it takes typically 12 to 14 years from registering a patent on a promising molecule to bring that drug to market. From registering the patent, there's a 20-year patent life, so if it takes you 14 years to bring it to market, you've got 6 years left to recover all of the expenditure that you made until that drug comes off patent, as well as to recover what you spent on all of the ones that fail along the way. So a massive focus for our clients is to try and reduce that 12 to 14 years to give greater patent protection. We have 3 types of solution: study management and data collection. These manage the minute-by-minute workflow of activities in a laboratory for different types of study that are determining the safety and the efficacy of new drugs. It's all about trying to remove any chance of somebody recording the wrong type of data and then having a problem when it gets to the later stages of the R&D process. So we have 3 product suites, I'm not going to talk about them, that are involved in various phases and various types of study that are going on. The data from these solutions is ultimately going to go to the regulatory authorities. So we then have a suite of solutions that are all about compiling the submissions that are going to go to the regulatory authorities. In years gone by, and actually most submissions today, that's a huge pile of paper, or the PDF equivalent of a huge pile of paper. So something that's about 6 foot tall, if you stood it end to end. If that goes to the Food and Drug Administration in the US to review, the first thing that the PhD reviewer does, he starts to rekey millions and millions of data points out of the piles of data, so that at the end he can do a similar analysis to the ones the pharma company did to make sure he agrees with the conclusions that the pharma company reached. So he spends 90% of his time rekeying data, which is very error prone. It's not the great use of a PhD researcher. So increasingly, the FDA and similar regulatory bodies around the world have been introducing standards that will allow them to get that data electronically, so all of the data rekeying goes away, and that reviewer can spend his time doing what he should really be doing, which is the analysis of the information. That should reduce, clearly, the reviewer's period of time, and it should get new drugs to market quicker. It's quite complicated, though. There's huge amounts of data, and it needs some sophisticated technology, and Instem is a market leader in putting together those electronic submissions that will allow the reviewers to be able to do that work. It has been voluntary for the pharma industry to submit in that way. The regulatory mandate that says from studies starting in 2016, you must submit in this way. So if we think back to those 3,300 companies that have got drugs at some stage in the pipeline, all of them will have to be producing electronic submissions using technology like the technology Instem provides. And finally, the other area we work in is big data analysis, translational science. The holy grail for the pharma industry is to stop doing many of the laboratory studies that are going on in here to demonstrate efficacy and safety, and instead to be able to look back at the thousands and thousands of studies they've run in the past, generally speaking on molecules that are very similar to the ones they're looking at today, and see, well, what did we see when we looked at very similar molecules in the past? Did we discover that there were safety implications? Should we actually even bother starting to go into a laboratory with this new potential molecule? It's a long time off before we will totally replace all of the studies in here, but there's a huge emphasis from the pharma organizations to do much more with that data they've spent billions of dollars on collecting over the last 10 or 15 years. If you go back too far with the data, you can't really rely on the provenance of the data, but you can certainly go back some way, particularly if it's come from data collection systems like ours that do a great job of making sure the consistency and reliability of the data you're collecting. So, because this area is a sort of a regulatory-driven, particularly time-bound opportunity, there's a couple of slides that talk more about one area of this regulatory submission area, a thing called SEND, the standard for the exchange of non-clinical data. Things don't move very fast in regulatory drug development, so developing this data submission standard has taken about 12 years. It's been done with a consortium of big pharma companies, some of the contract research organisations that do lots of studies for them and therefore know the data intimately, and a couple of technology providers, Instem and another one. As I mentioned before, the mandate has now been given that all studies after December 2016, or certain types of studies after December 2016, will be the first that must be submitted in this way. And Instem has a set of products that helps people create these SEND data sets. To visualize the SEND data set, so if you're a virtual biotech company, just a few people, and you're contracting out all of the stages of research and development to contract research organizations, the probability is you're not going to create your SEND data set yourself. You'll have somebody do that for you. It's not really human readable though. And before you make your submission to the FDA, you're almost certainly going to want to just look at it, even if you didn't create it. So we have tools to visualize SEND data sets. And perhaps one of the most exciting things for us, and we'll see why on the next slide, is for Instem now to be thinking not of just being a technology provider that will provide the sophisticated tool that will allow our clients to use the tool to create SEND data sets, but for them to send us their data in however it was collected, and we will run our tool and we will send them back a SEND data set. So the reason I say that is exciting is this graph tries to capture the number of SEND dataset submissions that will be made to the Food and Drug Administration as the coming years progress. As well as having the number of SEND studies submissions that are going to be made, it also has on the bottom here, this blue line, that's our estimate of what the industry will spend on the technology that allows them to create these SEND data sets. So spending around $3 or $4 million at the moment because the regulatory mandate hasn't yet quite arrived, growing steadily to somewhere around $8 million. It'll probably carry on at that level. Instem is a $25 million, $16 million revenue business. If we win the majority of this, which we would expect to, and it's another $6 million worth of revenue, it's helpful. It's not transformational. However, by the time the industry is submitting 10,000 studies in 2019, the time that it takes to exercise this tool, they'll be spending over $140 million in services. And Instem today is one of the most credible providers of the creation of SEND data sets. There's nobody that understands this standard better than Instem in the world. We've been recruiting most of the really good people that have been involved in the SEND standards group over the last 12 years. And we feel that we have a chance to secure a significant proportion of these outsourced SEND conversion services. We do think some of them, the biggest pharmaceutical companies, the biggest contract research organisations, will probably do the work themselves, and that's the ones in orange. But that still leaves a substantial opportunity for us not just to dominate the technology space, but to also generate service revenue. So I talked about the fragmented IT landscape. I talked about the fact that we were acquisitive, or are acquisitive, and that we'd done 3 acquisitions since we IPO'd in 2010. Having done 3 acquisitions in that period, we've spent all the money that we raised at IPO. There's still plenty of great businesses out there. We want to keep that acquisition component going alongside our organic growth. So we've just announced a successful equity fundraising, which has generated another £4.5 million worth of, or thereabouts, £4.4 million of acquisition capital, some working capital to invest in some of these very exciting organic growth opportunities. The fundraising was oversubscribed. It was great to have existing institutions support it that have been involved since IPO, as well as new ones. This just gives a bit of a flavour of the sorts of areas that we would be looking to source potential acquisition targets. So on this pie chart on the right, oops, help if I press the laser. Some areas in blue where we already have technology, some areas in white that we don't. Acquisition targets in all of those areas, things that complement, things that enhance. I mentioned our revenue, around just under £16 million. A trading update came out in January. We're a December the 31st year end. The earnings numbers here, the 2.4 million of EBITDA, the 1.7 of PBT, these are all consensus market expectations from the analysts rather than our numbers. What we published was our revenue number and our cash number, but you will see that right across our financial performance, strong performance in 2015. This is a summary of really all of the things I've said. Great opportunities for organic growth, great opportunities to continue to add acquisitions that enhance the business, and a focus on that recurring revenue. At that point, I'll stop and open things up to questions.
Questions, anybody? Anybody want to ask any questions? I'll start off with one anyway. Obviously, your revenue is growing. You put 15.8 as being the analyst's forecast.
Well, 15.8, that was what we said it would be a minimum revenue number for 2015.
When do you bring your numbers out? Very soon, by the sound of things.
Yes. We haven't announced the results, but we're normally late March, early April.
And nice surprises, do you think?
There shouldn't be anything too much variance from in there, because if there was going to be a variance, we really should have told the market about it.
So you've also got increasing work capital, obviously, because you're cash positive or cash flow positive at the moment, aren't you?
We are.
So acquisition-wise, you've got some targets up there on the. Are you like to make a few acquisitions during 2016?
So having gone out to raise some money, clearly we had to provide some confidence to people that were investing that we'd put that money to good use rather than just keep it on the balance sheet. We'd said to people we'd be very disappointed if we haven't done at least one acquisition by the end of this year. And we talked about a couple of example acquisitions that are some way through the sort of research process, and the logical next step would be to move into exclusivity and due diligence.
If I saw my name up on your slide, I'd be certainly putting my price up. Do you find that you can acquire relatively cheaply in this marketplace?
We do. So the typical range that we describe is somewhere between 5 and 8 times EBITDA, and if that came into Instem, where Instem's sort of around 11 or 12 times EBITDA, we obviously get an immediate benefit of that. The smaller businesses that we're targeting, there's not too many people that are following a similar acquisitive strategy. Where they are, they're in sort of neighbouring areas of R&D rather than ones that overlap. So often, we are by far the most credible and desirable acquirer of businesses, and often the people that we're buying, it's entrepreneurs and founders that have got their business to a certain size, they're struggling to take their next step for growth, realise they need to be part of something that can bring them global reach, and Instem looks very attractive.
And looking 12 months ahead, if we were same place, same time next year, what would you think your numbers might look like, both with organic growth and with acquisitions? Obviously 15.8 penciled in for now. For this year, what do you think? Well, last year, I should say.
So market expectation for 2016 revenue is at 17.1 organically. We'd expect to be acquiring businesses that have revenue anything from £1.5 million to £3 or £4 million. So that takes us into the low 20s.
And for any potential shareholders, obviously the concern nowadays is fundraising. You've done your fundraising. You don't expect to come back to the marketplace unless it's a big acquisition, I presume.
Correct. So it was very difficult to know the way equity markets at the moment, how much money could we sensibly raise. So we came out looking for quite a lot less than we raised. There was huge support, which was fantastic. We came out knowing that the amount that we were looking for would allow us to do one acquisition. The likelihood is now that, well, we raised 3 million at IPO, and we did 3 acquisitions with that. So we've raised 5 million. We might do some bigger ones, but we'd expect to be able to do 2 or more.
Good. And final question is, obviously you are cash positive now. Would shareholders get any return? Have you any plans for a sort of dividend going forward?
We'd said right from IPO that at some point we would introduce something small, something nominal, and then it would probably grow. We do have to go through a bit of a process of an internal restructuring so that we can distribute the cash that we've raised. That's an activity that I didn't introduce. Nigel, our CFO, is here, so if you've got questions and I'm not around, talk to Nigel.
So he has to fiddle a few numbers,
so
basically.
Nigel's got to get the restructuring done.
Oh, sorry, restructuring, sorry, restructuring.
That allows us to
fiddle a few
do
numbers,
that.
yeah.
Yes.
But it is potential on the cards. Good news for potential investors.
Absolutely.
Has anybody else got a question? Gentleman just here.
Just one question, really. The type of business you've described here seems to fit the bill for a certain Mr. Woodford, who's been looking around for these types of opportunities. If I looked at your top 20 list of shareholders, would I find his name on it?
You wouldn't. So he's obviously come to the fore with his fund after we IPO'd. Whether he would have had an interest at that point, I don't know. I mean, the great thing about what he's doing is he's supporting the people that are our customers. So whether he supported us directly or whether he just keeps supporting the people that will be our customers, either of those works pretty well for us.
Is that his patient capital fund or impatient capital fund?
Yes.
One of those ones. Yeah. He's invested very wisely, actually, I think so. Some good stuff.
He's kind of fell out with the big boys this week, but he seems to be more keen on your size of company.
Yeah.
Time just for one more question, if anybody got a question at all. Gentleman just next door. Thank you.
How many people do you employ?
About 170. So about 90 in the UK, biggish number in the US, and then others in other areas of the world.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Phil.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
You.